What's going on YouTube? FXDLS Brooklyn is back in the building. So if you're new to my channel, for over 8 years at this point, I've been covering content here on YouTube where we push ourselves to do long bike trips specifically on models that were not designed to do so, aka the Harley-Davidson Dyna and FXR platform. So finally, in the year of 2021, Harley-Davidson had taken a notice to what myself and a lot of other riders were doing in terms of the sport touring scene, and decided to finally allocate some resources to this style of riding, hence the inception of the Lowrider ST. So now fast forward to a series of events. First of which being that my main road bike, a 2016 Dyna Lowrider S, was really starting to get up there in terms of miles after the many long distance bike trips that I've done. And then the second big event is somehow, someway, the company of Harley-Davidson taking a chance on a small-scale C-list motovlogger from New York City and sending me a new Lowrider ST to ride on my own terms for an extended period of time and really put it to the test. So many miles later, when it was time for me to give this bike back to Harley-Davidson, my mind had been poisoned as I saw exactly what modern sport touring could be. So at this point, it wasn't an if, it was a when I would be on this bike. What I had declared in this point in my mind was that when my Dyna had ticked 100,000 miles, I would consider buying a new Lowrider ST and would immediately paint it birch white to match the signature paint job on my Dyna. So what I did not expect was that the second iteration of the Lowrider ST would come out in this exact paint scheme that I was planning to do when I finally got a Lowrider ST. So knowing that the paint schemes on these bikes outside of Vivid Black only stay around for 1 year, I kind of knew it was now or never. Which brings us to the dead of winter 2023. I found myself fighting through a snowstorm in the Catskill Mountains to see what this bike looked like in person, as O'Toole's Harley-Davidson had set one aside that they had just got in. It only took seconds of seeing this bike in person and sitting on it to know that this was the one. And at that point, I became a Lowrider ST owner. FXLR ST Brooklyn for all of you that got jokes. I clocked 5,000 miles in no time on this bike, and that combined with the many miles that I put on the one that Harley-Davidson sent me, I was in a place to confidently and truthfully make content about this bike. So you probably saw, but not too long ago, I released a video relaying a trend that I had been noticing ever since I've been making Lowrider ST content. The fact of the matter was, it had become apparent that the new Lowrider ST was such a formidable bike that people were trading in their baggers to throw a leg over this new powerhouse, an unprecedented thing in the world of Harley-Davidson touring. The response to this video was interesting, to say the least. Many people hands down agreed with the topic of the video and offered their own stories of why they moved on to the Lowrider ST from a bagger. Many people straight up rejected the argument and respectfully claimed that they would be holding on to their baggers for the unforeseeable future and nothing would change their mind. And some people just enjoyed the video and wrote in just to talk about their own journey on two wheels. So regardless of which of these three categories you fell into if you commented, the response was overwhelmingly positive and allowed me to have many great conversations and meet a bunch of new riders from all over the globe. But as more and more people continued to write in, I began to realize something. I was very much conveying an argument of why I believe the Lowrider ST is one of the best Harley-Davidsons ever made in terms of sport touring. What I failed to do was to relay some of the reasons why people might not want to buy this motorcycle. I am clearly a Lowrider ST enthusiast, but at the end of the day, I'm a realist. And I need to make sure that you have both sides of the story in regards to this bike, especially if you are one of the many people who are considering buying one of these bikes. So hence, that brings us to the dark side of the Lowrider ST. So just as we were able to break down the main reasons as to why it would make sense to buy a Lowrider ST, let's take a moment to also acknowledge and simply list out some of the most common reasons I have heard in regards to why people might not want to buy this motorcycle. The first point being vibration is something that many lowrider ST owners have wrote into me about. It's something I had never noticed until it was brought to my attention. So this is specifically an issue if you decide to go higher on your bars, which I think most people will tend to do. After going higher on your bars, you might begin to notice that there is a slight vibration that seems to be coming from the grips of the bike into your hands. For me, I would have never even considered this a factor if somebody didn't bring it to my attention, but upon further inspection, I actually did notice that it was something that was happening. So the best way I could describe what it feels like is if you've ever played one of those old school carnival games where it simulates being electrocuted, kind of feels like a version of that. So I'm going to quote Stacy Wilt on this one, who is another rider that does a whole bunch of heavy miles and bike trips on the lowrider ST, and her and I were recently having a conversation about this topic. So for real, this is a thing with the S and the ST models. It's not ST specific. They do vibrate more than the other Softails. Personally, I don't have any issues dealing with it. My rigid mounted Sportster is still much worse. So I'm definitely in agreement with Stacy on this one, as I come from the hot rod Dyna and FXR world, which makes the lowrider ST feel like the smoothness of a sports car in a lot of ways. For me, unless I'm death gripping the bars, which is something you should never be doing anyway, it's just not a noticeable enough factor to ruin my ride or to stop me from crushing miles. However, I have had people write in to tell me that it was bad enough on their lowrider STs that they wound up changing their mind and either going back to the Dyna or what they were on before. I do wonder if experimenting with different bushings could play a role, or if Harley-Davidson will ever have a solution for this down the line, but here's my 2 cents. It's a motorcycle. It's going to vibrate and rumble. Keep it moving. I mean, not for nothing, but I also come from a history of bikes that would come out of the showroom sending you into the scariest death wobble of your life. So in comparison to buying a new Dyna, if this is the worst thing I'm going to have to deal with performance-wise, I'll take it to have all the gains that's going to come with this bike. So one of the next top reasons that I see people write in about in regards to not wanting to buy this bike is the horrendous asymmetrical bag situation. So this has probably been the most popular dispute with this bike from day one, and honestly, I can't blame people for having an issue with this. You're laying down over 20 G's for the damn thing. So is it too much to ask for the bags to be symmetrical? Everyone knows that the first thing most people are going to do is dump that shotgun exhaust and put a 2-into-1 in there. So it just kind of feels like a major blunder on Harley's part design-wise. Now, is this enough for me to write off this bike? Absolutely not. I personally purchased this bike to use as a workhorse, to put in heavy mile bike trips on, not to enter it into any beauty pageants. It's subtle enough where I forget that it's even a thing unless somebody points it out to me. So to have something as small as my bags being asymmetrical, it's just not going to ruin my day. I really don't care. It doesn't affect my ride in any way or the performance, so it's not a big deal. And if it really is that big of a deal to somebody, I would just tell them to throw on Leather Pros or some of the other various companies that are offering solutions to this problem. Alright, so the next one. Standing at 5'7" and 155 pounds, the lowrider ST truly fits me like a glove. That being said, the taller side of the rider base has voiced concerns in terms of being comfortable on this bike. I think this concern is valid. However, I do know numerous people on the taller side of the spectrum who have opted to ride a lowrider ST as their main bike instead of a bagger. Take Dan from O'Toole's Harley-Davidson. Dan stands at 6'2" and is 73 years old, and he's gotten away with making his lowrider ST work for him as his main bike. And he's only made one change to his bike to make it work for somebody taller, and that was the seat. Throwing on a seat that would allow him to sit further back, he was not only able to comfortably do the bike trips on this bike, but also without having to go through lengths to change it to forward controls. So yeah, out the box, if you're really tall, is this bike going to be the most comfortable for you? Probably not. But are there 1 or 2 simple mods that you could do to make this bike work for you? Absolutely. So some of my friends were really excited to throw a leg over the Lowrider ST, but upon doing a test ride, decided that the fairing just did not block enough wind for them to say that it would be feasible for the long miles. One example is my friend Mark from Lindell Brakes, who actually decided to buy a standard Lowrider S and then build it up with a T-Sport fairing. And this has seemed to work out for him pretty well. For me personally, the ST fairing is my number one preference in terms of fairings, and that's somebody who actively runs bikes with T-Sport fairings, quarter fairings, and a retro FXRT fairing. To me, it's the perfect balance of airflow, and it cuts through the miles like none other. This, like many things motorcycle related, simply comes down to preference. What I would say is if the ST fairing doesn't work for you, a lot of people have been going higher on the windshield or just swapping out the windshield to an aftermarket company, and just that simple mod has made it work for a lot of people that were not happy with the stock wind deflection. So let's be real. If being comfortable is your number one priority, any one of the bikes offered from the Grand American Touring line is going to do it the best. There's really not just much else we could say about that. Me personally, I feel very comfortable on the Lowrider ST, so it's just not a factor to me. One thing that came out of my recent video on this topic is people writing in with concerns because they do a lot of two-up riding. That's a valid concern. I think we all know that the bagger platform is going to take the cake for both rider and passenger comfort. However, again, acknowledging that I'm talking about a passenger that's definitely on the smaller side, her and I have easily gotten away with multiple bike trips on the Lowrider ST at this point, just by running a Saddlemen SDC Pro seat as well as a Harley Davidson backrest. But given the amount of two-up riding that I do, if it were at a point where my passenger was not comfortable enough to tour with me, then this would be a factor in my decision making. But again, there are seats out there such as the Saddlemen Touring Step Up that might just be the difference between your passenger being happy on your new Lowrider ST or not. So I would say do some experimentation before you decide that the ST is not for you and your passenger. This is one that I always laugh at. That bike has no soul. And this is something that I've heard a lot from the Dyna FXR crowd that has been hesitant to make the leap to the Milwaukee 8 platform. I will acknowledge that there's truths about this point. Where the Lowrider ST is going to overtake the Dyna platform in sheer pound-to-pound performance, I don't think anyone is going to argue that the character and the visceral feeling of riding a Dyna cannot be matched. Some have even gone as far as to compare the feeling of riding a Milwaukee 8 to that of operating a glorified sewing machine. Me personally, because I have multiple hot rod Dyna builds, I actually kind of like the fact that the bike is not over the top in terms of volume and sheer rumble. However, if you are somebody that needs to feel that classic Harley rumble and sound, simply upgrading the cam could turn your Milwaukee 8 into a completely different bike. Trust me, I've seen them, I've heard them, I've rode them. I'm personally still undecided if this is an upgrade that I want to make, but again, yes, you can have it all. Just upgrade the cams and call it a day. So there you have it. Just as we took time to acknowledge the undisputed strengths of the Lowrider ST, we have also taken time to highlight some of the potential flaws and shortcomings, being very clear that as a rider from the Dyna and FXR touring world, the four strengths greatly overshadow all of the flaws that I've mentioned, most of which are just not even a factor for me and my experience with this bike. But anyway, whether you're buying a new Lowrider ST or you're trading in your current bike to buy a new Lowrider ST, this is a big decision. So I've done my best to be both explicit and objective here. I have spent a lot of time on this bike throughout the last year, and what I could say is the best thing you could do if you are still curious about this bike is go out and test ride one. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, take a moment to hit that like button and consider subscribing. I do have a Patreon for some deeper cuts, and we would love to have you on the team. Whether you're buying a new lowrider ST or going in a different direction, I hope you stay safe and stay low. Keep that PMA all day, and on that, FXDLS Brooklyn is out.